The Conan the Barbarian reboot series is no longer in development at Netflix. Before Netflix, the reboot series was also being developed at Amazon, which obviously also didn't happen. But before Amazon were developing a reboot, Universal were developing a sequel to the 1981 movie by John Milius titled The Legend of Conan. This is a movie that Arnold still wants to do, so much so that he used a big part of his recent Hollywood Reporter puff piece to push it. But to no avail, of course. It didn't happen then, and it certainly won't happen now. But this leaves the question, why not? What went wrong with all of these? What is it about Conan that is so difficult? We shall see and go through what caused each of these to go belly up, including the Netflix series, something which has never been revealed anywhere before. In this editorial then, I will begin with why time has run out for Arnold's Legend of Conan and exactly who is to blame for that, before moving on to the reboot and why it fell apart at Amazon, and most recently, the never-before-told story of why it fell apart at Netflix. When Oliver Stone wrote his script for the original Conan the Barbarian, he wanted to do 12 Conan movies. But that was Oliver Stone's vision, no one else's. When John Milius rewrote that script and directed the first movie, he envisioned doing 3 movies, each centered around the theme of the first being will. He only got to do that first movie though, because he wasn't invited back for part 2. Someone who was, but who had no interest in appearing beyond part 2, was Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. He did not want to return for a third movie, and even details in his biography how he bargained with Dino De Laurentiis to get out of his Conan commitments. For almost 2 decades following the original 2 movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger himself was the hold-up precluding a third movie from happening, because he'd been there, done that, and moved on in his career. Only in the early 2000s did he contemplate coming back for a third movie when, under Warner's stewardship, John Milius wrote the script for King Conan, Crown of Iron. At that time, Arnold still had the star power to make movies happen, so if he had committed to it, it would have, and it came close. The extended cut of the original movie, which was released on special edition DVD in the year 2000, featured a new ending epilogue tease for King Conan, and a new commentary track by John Milius and Arnold Schwarzenegger, setting the stage for the sequel that they then were planning. But instead of making that King Conan movie, Arnold entered politics, leaving Milius' script to be locked up in Warner's vaults for perpetuity, while the rights lapsed. They were picked up by Millennium, and since Arnold was in office, they made the reboot with Jason Momoa. Since that movie failed, Millennium gave up the rights, which happened right around the same time that Arnold left office and wanted to make a Hollywood comeback. Only then, 30 years after his previous Conan movie, did Arnold in any serious way prioritize making a third movie, which he wanted to do with Universal, who acquired the rights after Millennium. The challenge was that by then, even if it had been legally available to Universal, which it wasn't, Arnold had aged out of John Milius' King Conan Crown of Iron script. He had also aged out of all the original Conan stories, as well as the pastiche stories. In fact, in the 30 years since the previous movie, Arnold had aged to the point where they had straight up overshot Conan's entire reign as king, and so they went for something else. What Arnold pitches as Conan's Unforgiven is very loosely based on David Gemmell's Legend, with the character Druss rewritten into Conan. So, what's the story? Well, it's not the story about how Conan became king, or even a story about Conan as king, but rather a Conan at the end of his life. In this story, Conan grew wary of the trials and tribulations and constant assassination attempts that came with being king. So he walked out on his people, threw his kingship away, and exiled himself to a shed in the mountains.
Fuck this shit, I'm out. Fuck this shit, I'm out.
No, I'm not joking. This might not have been how the story Arnold wanted to tell originally started out, but after a few rewrites, this is where it ended up. After years of self-imposed exile, an old familiar threat returns. And only then does Old Man Conan return to civilization, because he wants to die in battle so he can enter Valhalla, and not from old age alone on his mountain. Arnold pitches this as Conan's Unforgiven, but since few under the age of 40 have seen that movie, a shorthand that would make more sense to audiences today is the Star Wars The Last Jedi of Conan, because there would have been some definite shades of that. Though, to be fair, he wouldn't be given the full Jake Skywalker treatment, only parts of it. And, as pointed out by Script Doctor, having the once hero isolate himself for decades only to come out of retirement for one final battle was something of a trope at the time when this was written. Case in point, we also saw it in Tron Legacy, only after the fact did The Last Jedi become the quintessential example of this trope. But The Last Jedi wasn't out yet, so why didn't this movie happen? Well, as it turned out, after Arnold's other comeback movies failed at the box office, especially Terminator Sega Genesis, Universal decided against flushing $150 million on the Legend of Conan and pulled the plug. At this point, Arnold is rumored to have pitched the movie to everyone else who could fund and distribute it, but no one were interested, seeing as Arnold's post-politics comeback movies, up to and including Terminator, with few exceptions, was but a string of flops. That's why Legend of Conan never happened and never will. Not because Arnold doesn't have the rights, which is what he was complaining about in his Hollywood Reporter puff piece, but because no one in Hollywood wanted to fund it. If he had someone who were willing to do that, the movie rights would likely have been forthcoming, but he didn't, so they weren't. After 3 years of Arnold trying and failing to find another taker, the Conan rights holder couldn't wait any longer, and since Hollywood had rejected the sequel, the rights for a Conan reboot were issued to Amazon. The simple fact of the matter is that Arnold waited too long. He had every opportunity to make more Conan movies in the 80s, 90s and aughts, but by the 2010s, it was too late. Now, another 10 years later, now that he is even older, his track record is even worse, and lest we forget, his Q rating has taken a hit after telling everyone we in retrospect see were right to screw your freedom.
No, screw your freedom.
In the name of what we now know was pseudoscience at best. Now it is way too late. So, no once and former King Conan with Arnold will be forthcoming. While the closure of a third movie would have been nice, we still would have missed out on Conan's life from the end of the first movie up to, well, the end. It's time to move on. I know there are some who feel that no one can be Conan but Arnold, and I get that, but be aware that you only feel that way because John Milius, a great filmmaker, retooled Oliver Stone's script and tailored it for Arnold by giving all of the story-driving scenes and dialogue to the narrator and supporting cast. A Conan more in line with the original stories and comics would be worth your time. The Conan stories were written by Texan author Robert E. Howard back in the 1930s. There are more layers and philosophy in those stories than you'd think, but surface level, Conan is the greatest badass there ever was. He is chivalrous and will rescue damsels in distress. He lives by the sword, and he has frequent hookups with hot ladies. To the audience, this is an appealing character that has endured for almost a century and will continue to endure forevermore, as the traits he inhabits appeals at the most fundamental, unchangeable, basic level of human nature. As such, the Conan stories are timeless. More than that, they in no small part inspired the Game of Thrones books, and realizing this, Roy Price at Amazon, when they were looking for the next Game of Thrones, picked up the pitch from Malmberg and showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik and greenlit 2 seasons of Conan. But before cameras rolled, current-year sensibilities caught up with them. Everything that makes Conan appealing, enduring, and timeless comes in conflict with the fleeting neo-Puritan current year sensibilities that have infected Hollywood in the past few years, and which, if anything, seeks to change human nature. For a new breed of executives with sensitivity training and ESG courses behind them, a character like Conan is about as problematic as it gets. Enter Jennifer Salke, the Kathleen Kennedy and Alyssa Heinerscheid of Amazon. After Roy Price was Me Too'd out of the company in what looked like completely trumped up accusations in a political hit job, Jennifer Salke was brought in to clean up and bring virtue, representation, and current year sensibilities to Amazon at every level, including its content. And so she cancelled Conan in favor of The Wheel of Time, which got a female-centric twist, and so did The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, which ended up pulling a Bud Light in the ratings, where it was soundly beaten by HBO's House of the Dragon, which, in a fun twist, was made by the very same showrunners Salke had fired from Conan. We've told this story before, but what we haven't told before is what happened with Conan at Netflix, where the rights ended up next. The only official word on what happened comes from Conan rights holder Fredrik Malmberg of Heroic Signatures, who said, "We worked and talked and spent good time, but ultimately it didn't come to fruition. That's Hollywood." That's not saying much, and not much can be gleaned from that. But, as long-time watchers will know, we have a number of sources with access to what happens behind the scenes at a number of studios. Case in point, courtesy of Mikey Sutton, we were the first outlet in the world to break that Kathleen Kennedy had been renewed as the head of Lucasfilm, that Michael Keaton would return as Batman, and through our own Tom Connor sources, that James Gunn was being courted as the head of DC, among many other DC scoops, and most recently that Star Trek Section 31 was greenlit. All of those were officially confirmed days or weeks later, but they're the big, visible success stories. Most of the time, scoop confirmations, if indeed they are confirmations, are more subtle, and there is a past example that comes to mind. Remember Masters of the Universe Revelation, The Last Jedi of He-Man? That's the revival series where He-Man was killed off in the very first episode, so that the series could focus on the recently out-of-the-closet Karen Tila, in a massive subversion of expectations that no one saw coming. No one except, of course, Clownfish TV, because we are not the only ones with sources. Season 1 Part 1 opened big, but it was so poorly received that hardly anyone saw Part 2, so here's Tom doing a reminder of what happened there and thus went wrong with He-Man on Netflix. And before you wonder, yes, I'm going somewhere with this.
Hi, Skeletor. Hi, Evelyn. I gave you everything, you stupid cunt. And I'm gonna take it from you. By fucking you.
Yeah, literally, that was in the show.
Come on. You are so obsessed with He-Man. That's all you ever
they had
think
some
about.
Gratuitous grinding going on.
So I'm going to destroy everything. Because you're obsessed with one person. I'm fucking everything up. You're crazy, bitch. I'm going to team up with the good guys. Fuck you.
And women don't
not
take
done yet.
Oh no!
No, and this is a very true.
Yeah, everybody, yeah, hold it.
You
He's
bitch!
The whole reenactment.
You didn't tell me who I am. I'm dead. I don't fucking care.
Wait a minute, the sorceress died?
By the way,
they killed her
your
off.
birthright is to be like me. I don't want to be like you. Well, tough shit. If you don't, everything ends. Okay. Now, there's one catch I forgot to tell you about. Fuck. What's that?
Fuck.
You can't leave the castle. Ever. Oh, I don't agree with that. That's not my truth. I'm going to include everybody. That way, I can leave the castle whenever I want. Fuck your rules. Bitch, that's not how the Force works. I can't hear you.
That's literally what happened. That is literally what happened. And that's the thing. She's like, I don't want to. It's like, I don't want to abide by your rules. I don't want to make sacrifices.
Now, everyone blamed showrunner Kevin Smith for all the wokery, SJW-isms, and overall stupidity. But, according to our sources, and which we revealed at the time, Kevin Smith was the showrunner in name only. He came in late, and he was there to hype the project up, maybe add some jokes, but the real decision maker and the de facto showrunner was, allegedly, as claimed by our source, Netflix producer Ted Biaselli. That scoop is one you'd think it would be hard to confirm, but in a roundabout way it was confirmed by Kevin Smith himself. Here is our video covering his town hall from the time where we expanded on our initial scoop. It's a bit lengthy, but again, going somewhere with this, so just watch. In a video put up on his own YouTube channel, Kevin Smith was asked the question how nervous he was about the fan response to his ideas.
I mean, not very. I mean, honestly, like, we had the two biggest fans in the world working on the show.
So, Kevin Smith wasn't particularly nervous at all, because two of his production partners were superfans. One was Rob David at Mattel. The other person Kevin Smith leaned on as the voice of the fans was Netflix executive Ted Biaselli, who from now on will be referred to as Teddy.
So between those two titans, like, we called ourselves the Three Towers of Preternia, I could not fail. I wasn't worried about the reaction of the audience because I knew who the audience was. I was working for the audience. Like, Teddy represented the exact customer we were trying to reach.
There we have it. From Kevin Smith's point of view, it was Teddy, more accurately Netflix Ted Biaselli, who represented the exact audience they were trying to reach. That is, in all likelihood, where they went wrong. Ted Biaselli is, by all accounts, genuinely a fan of Masters of the Universe, and a whole host of other 80s properties. He apparently does collect the toys and other merchandise, and he does know the lore, so let's not take that away from him. However, he is by all accounts something else as well, namely an activist. Case in point, when a black He-Man fan expressed disappointment that King Grayskull had been race-bent to become black, as this fan would rather see new original characters instead of getting hand-me-downs. It was Biaselli who answered him, "I hear you, and that will indeed be part of our story too. But a big hurdle when you're introducing a new character to a line of so many well-established characters is that they're bound to be outsiders, and harder to accept as canon, at least for a while. Nobody gives a shit about Sir Laserlot." Note that when Biaselli says nobody gives a shit about Sir Laserlot, he actually means that he doesn't give a shit about Sir Laserlot. Sir Laserlot was created by Jeff Johns, and if adapted the right way, he would become an instant fan favorite. But getting back to King Grayskull, Biaselli continued, "We asked ourselves early on about the need for two giant white blonde dudes in the pantheon of Motu. And honestly, it makes both characters less special in their iconography. I wish I could take credit for being the one with the idea to make Grayskull black. Because now, in the history of all of Champions of Grayskull, a black man has a role of prominence. As opposed to just being the guy with the clamp who's King Randor's bodyguard." So, Ted Biaselli regrets that it wasn't his idea to race-swap King Grayskull. He did race-swap someone else though, because he also commented on Andra, Teela's love interest. Same thing with Andra. She was initially created as a new character. It was my idea to dig into the lore and raise up a character who had a small appearance but a strong following. People have been wanting to see Teela and Andra fight side by side for a while, as opposed to creating a new character that could easily be rejected. Honestly, do we really need two badass redheads? Motu had no women of color, and we saw an opportunity and took it. Why not give little black girls a hero that looks like them? Based on Biaselli's comment here, it would appear that at one point, Andra was a wholly original character, and presumably a black original character. In Biaselli's mind, however, the audience could reject her, So it was his idea to appropriate an existing character into the new original character they were introducing anyway. As a bonus, they got rid of another troublesome redhead in Andra, just like they got rid of a troublesome big blonde white dude in King Grayskull. Take note of Biaselli's reasoning for doing these race swaps, namely that in his mind, audiences might reject an original character that wasn't race swapped. This is a pretty condescending view, and one that says more about him than it does about the audience. In fact, it sets him apart from the audience. A fan he may be, but his attitude and worldview is not shared by the rest of the audience. It would appear that Ted Biaselli, or Teddy, is an activist first and a fan of He-Man only second. Unfortunately, Kevin Smith seemingly did not realize that.
So I never felt scared. I was never like, what's the audience going to say? Because I knew who the audience was. It was Teddy. And Teddy loved every step of the way. And if he didn't love something, he made it so that he did love it. He'd be like, can we do this? Can we add this? I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Great. Like, you know, Marlena in episode, it ain't, it's spoilers. You'll see. Teddy, knowing that since we had his sign off for everything, I was never worried about the audience seeing it, because I'm like, if that guy likes it, everybody's gonna like it.
The problem here is that Teddy was atypical and not representative of the audience they were trying to reach. In making the series for him and for his worldview, they may have pleased professional reviewers who share that worldview, but they alienated the actual audience, which is evidenced by the discrepancy between how critics and audiences review the series. Still there? Alright, after that setup, let's get back to what allegedly happened with Conan at Netflix. As per usual, none of this can be independently verified, and it should be taken with a grain of salt and treated as rumor. But according to our sources, Conan at Netflix was off to a great start. The Netflix producer overseeing the deal was allegedly Chris Henigman, who also oversaw the Netflix Marvel series. The appointed showrunner allegedly was Stephen S. DeKnight, the showrunner of the first and arguably best season of Netflix Daredevil, and before that. He was also the showrunner on Spartacus over at Starz, so clearly this is someone that could do Conan and do it right. So what happened? Well, apparently, this deal was one that took a long time to get made, and by the time it was done, producer Chris Henigman and showrunner Stephen S. DeKnight reportedly had a falling out with Netflix, which ended their tenure on Netflix Conan. This is where things started going off the rails then, because replacing Chris Henigman as overseeing producer, Netflix appointed, according to our sources, wait for it, Ted Biaselli, the bane of He-Man, and the Kathleen Kennedy and Alyssa Heinerscheid of Netflix.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
Allegedly, like he did with He-Man, Biaselli wanted to subvert Conan and lose what was perceived as misogyny in order to make the series more accessible to modern audiences so that they would feel safe, included, and represented. But unlike what he did on Motu, Biaselli met resistance on Conan. After the failure of the 2011 movie, Malmberg and his partners at Heroic Signatures, as well as their choice for new showrunner, who our source doesn't know who is, but who may or may not be the filmmaker that is developing the new Conan movie, were all determined that they have to get this right and fought for the original Robert E. Howard vision of Conan. When it became clear that the new producers at Netflix had too different a vision and no compromise was possible, then according to our sources, Malmberg took Conan away from them. From what I understand, talks are now underway with another company that is far less resistant to doing Conan right. So there you have it, with all the take as rumor warnings in place. Until someone decides to officially speak out, this is as complete a picture as we are likely to get of what happened with Conan at Netflix. Considering what they did to He-Man, sounds like a bullet dodged to me. But that's me. What's your thoughts on all of this? Let me know in the comments.